All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We're very excited for today's topic on using Jamboard for qualitative analysis. The presentation will build on the basics of analysis, but we hope both experts and new researchers will learn something new today. So I'd like to introduce today's presenter, which is Jane Davis. Louise, if you'd like to introduce her.
Thank you, Liba. Jane Davis is an assistant professor teaching stream in the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at the University of Toronto. She is a registered occupational therapist in Ontario, Canada, and she has been editor. She's been associate editor for Qualitative Review for the Canadian Journal of Occupational Therapy for the past 8 years. She's also supervised over 100 master's dissertations in occupational therapy. Most of the research that she has supervised has used qualitative methodologies, and she has published over 20 peer-reviewed studies. We will be very grateful and happy to have you, Jane, present to us. We are hoping to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Jane, for being here today. I'd like to just say one last thing for our participants and we'll get started. I'd like you to mute yourself as you enter the session, and please refrain from using the chat function too much unless during our interactive parts of the session, as we have some participants using screen readers and the chat function interferes with that. If you have any comments or questions to make, please use the raise hand function. And at the end of our session today, we'd like to ask you to fill out a short survey on your experience to help our team make these webinars as accessible and relevant as possible for you. I will be adding the survey in the chat at the end of the session. So yeah, that's about it. And thank you, Jane, if you'd like to get started.
Thank you, Liba and Louise, for the introduction. So I'm going to speak today about Jamboard and using it for qualitative analysis. It's a new Google technology that's really only been available in the last little while. So I'm fairly new to it too, but I have used it for over the past year with a number of my students' projects. So I'm going to take you through that. If you have any Okay, so I don't know if you've heard all that. So if you have questions through the discussion, please raise your hand and somebody will let me know that you have questions. And we can also, I can field any questions at the end as well. So, so using Jamboard for qualitative analysis, it's a useful technology because it provides a capacity for us to share and see what everybody is working on together. So it really speaks to a collaborative effort in qualitative analysis, and it helps us apply the DEPICT model, which Dr. Stephanie Nixon spoke about earlier in the webinar series. I'm going to also speak to the starting points for data analysis. We'll talk about descriptive and abstract types of analysis, the research questions associated with that, some coding, so the whole process of types of coding that are used on Jamboard, and then I'm going to take you through Jamboard. So the objectives for today are to identify the different foci of descriptive and abstract qualitative analysis, so the abstract being more analytical qualitative analysis, to understand the affinity mapping and diagramming process using both a bottom-up and a top-down approach, and to use Jamboard to support collaborative data analysis and demonstrate these types of processes. So the depict model, for any more details on the depict model, you can watch Stephanie Nixon's webinar, which is posted on the Pearl site, the Pearl YouTube channel. But these are the 6 steps through the depict model that are used, and they speak really well to the idea around collaborative analysis. And that's where the Jamboard is really useful. And when we come together and want to collaborate on something and be able to use that technology so that we can all access that point. I'm going to speak to 2 different types and use these ideas through the talk today and through my demonstration on Jamboard to understand the different ways that you can use Jamboard. So you can use it in a more descriptive based way. So for qualitative research questions, that might be looking at what are the barriers and facilitators to including persons with disabilities in research. Or you could use it in a more abstract, with more abstract questions or more analytical questions. So what are the experiences of persons with disability with involvement in research? So we can look at it as more sort of categorical or more abstract. And I'm going to speak a little bit more to that and give an example of what that means. So as I mentioned, the descriptive aspects around the descriptive question, like what are the barriers and facilitators, is a categorical type question. It's asking for you to put information into 2 different categories, barriers and facilitators. In some ways, it's giving you already a predetermined categorization or coding method in order to address the research question. In more of an abstract or thematic question, then the focus is on experiences, which is a much more dynamic understanding of qualitative experiences or qualitative meaning making, and looking at how people come to make meaning of their experiences versus understanding what the barriers and facilitators and those more concrete categorical aspects are. So these 2 types of research questions, and there's a lot more than this, but I'm giving you these 2 types and so that I can show you how they might be used within Jamboard. So if we look at categorical and thematic analysis, the first one is descriptive. So categorical analysis is tending to trying to describe certain things. It's trying to tell you or group things in a fairly concrete manner. It stays close to the data, and it's really trying to describe categories of knowledge. The pictures on the right-hand side, for those of you who can see, so there's a set of a fork, knife, and 2 spoons in one image. There's chopsticks on a chopstick rest in another. And then there's 2 thinner chopsticks and a long-handled spoon in another. These are all, if we think about these visually as pieces of data, we can make them into, if we code them, we're going to give them names and name them within our culture. So initial codes in a descriptive sense would be something like fork, knife, spoons, chopsticks. So they would stick, our identification or our coding of these ideas would stick fairly close to the descriptive nature, to how we would describe these within our culture. Categories might blend these ideas together. So it might put these things in different types of categories. We might look at Western cutlery, or suhyo, which is a Korean cutlery, or we might look at Eastern eating utensils, or we might categorize things and call them things you can eat with. And so all of these types of things are categories. They give you an understanding of the things that you're grouping together within a category. You're naming that category. In a more abstract or thematic way of thinking about things, you would move further away from the data. You're still going to have an initial code, but your code is coming from a different perspective around how you see and talk about the data. So you want to look more about discussing knowledge around meaning making. How do people come to make meaning of their experiences or situations? And so that question refers back to that research question about experiences of involvement in research. The descriptive question is more about what are the barriers and facilitators, or what are the different types of those types of questions, which can be done qualitatively, but are quite categorical in sense. So with respects to abstract or thematic analyses, the initial codes of the same items, so that the fork, knife, and spoons lying there on a table, or the chopsticks with the spoon, or the other chopsticks on the chopstick rest, those items would be viewed within their context and trying to understand what the meaning or significance of is of those items in that way as they're being presented. So you become more embedded in the image of what's being presented, and if it's text, more within the text that's been presented. So our initial codes here would be something like empty cutlery, or a single place setting, or a single setting. So understanding the cutlery isn't just these things that you're categorizing, but the meaning that might be represented within the positioning or the way these items are presented to you. So in that sense, instead of descriptive categories, which are like Western cutlery or things you eat with, the themes might be something like not having enough to eat, or eating alone. So having empty cutlery without food might represent not having enough food to eat, or having a single setting might be then themed as eating alone, or eating in a solitary way. So it becomes more about the meaning making in that thematic sense than about the categories of the items or of the text. And I'm going to transfer this type of understanding when we come into the Jamboard. So when we come to do collaborative analysis, you need to look at using an affinity approach. So how we can come to create convergence of ideas, and also because anything that doesn't converge would signify divergence, so difference. So the collaborative coding method uses an affinity mapping and diagramming technique, where you use, you apply one code and present that one code. And then the next code, you see if it is convergent with that first code, or if it's divergent or different from that code. And in that way, you would present and post those codes in different places on your screen for Jamboard, or different places on a table, that type of thing. In Dr. Nixon's presentation on the depict model, she spoke about convergence and divergence and using different methods in order to categorize or group together different ideas from the data. And that's what this idea is. And now we're gonna look at how it can be transferred onto Jamboard. So affinity mapping and diagramming also organizes, its focus is really organizing large amounts of data into their natural relationships. So how do these aspects of the data really form and come together? And we do that not at the data level, typically in analysis, but at the code level. So about one step or so higher, one or two steps higher than that initial data level. And with the depict model, it uses an idea around code books. So putting together those data into code books initially, and then mapping out the other interviews or things that you're doing with that specific code from the code book, and then bringing those codes together in a convergent way, and leaving others that are different out in a divergent way. Our hope is that through affinity mapping and diagramming, that we can generate new knowledge through consolidation of data. So when we look at, so on the right-hand side, I have pulled from Jamboard what's called stickies. And so piece, typically like a hard copy sticky would be a piece of paper with a little sticky edge on the top. And we might stick it on walls or stick it on other papers to designate certain things and write notes on it. So Jamboard uses, one of the tools it has are these stickies. And so on the right-hand side of this slide, I have offered examples of the categorical or the data points of something that is focused on more creating categories versus creating themes. So I have like lower level codes such as fork, knife, teaspoon, dessert spoon, chopsticks, and then I have somewhat upper level or secondary codes such as Western eating utensils or Eastern eating utensils or sugio, and then I have another code on top, things you eat with. And so the idea of these different stickies is that they help you bring together and categorize the items that you're seeing in your data. So the focus of coding for categories is really focusing on grouping things, so items together. Just like when we think back to that research question on barriers and facilitators, it focuses on what are the barriers, that question does, or what are the barriers and what are the facilitators of inclusive research. And so trying to understand what those things are. And that's what coding for categories is. And that's what this example on the right-hand side shows. With coding for categories, we always start at the bottom. So we want to designate things in the data set, and starting at the bottom means staying as close to the data as possible. So for instance, if we actually had text that said fork, knife, and spoon, we would call those potentially cutlery or things you eat with, and that would be the initial code. I provided some pictures of cutlery. And so with the visual representations, if I provide a code to that, it would be that fork, knife, and spoon. But when we pull those things together, we get this fairly concrete category of things you eat with. If we think about that type of category, things you eat with, it could include many other things. It could include hands, it could include cups, it could include saucers, it could include a whole bunch of other things because of how we've grouped that together. So it allows for the pulling together or the convergence of a number of different items. If you don't want to converge that many items under it, if it's too high a level away from the data, then you could stop and leave your categories at Eastern eating utensils, Western eating utensils, and discuss those categories separately. You always, with coding for categories, you want to keep close to the data. You're not trying to do really high level abstract interpretation of the data. You're trying to stay as close to describing the data as possible. And so trying to really be more focused on those specific categories. When we look at coding for themes, so this goes back to the research question about what are the experiences of persons living with disability in their involvement in research. If we look at something like that, then the idea of experiences really pulls us into meanings. And what is the meaning? How do people come to experience or make sense of or make meaning of things that are occurring? For this slide, I have on the right-hand side as well, the idea of how the stickies can be used from the Jamboard, an example of it, how the stickies can be used from the Jamboard to do coding for themes. Now, with coding for themes, you can code in different ways. You could take that codebook codes and you could bring them together like you would with the categories and compare whether this is the same or different and create groups based on that similarity, or if they're different, put them in a different spot on the screen. And so you build these piles together. You can do them like that from bottom up, and then others can provide, so there's in Jamboard, there's 5 different colors of stickies. So everybody, that if you have 5 different people, they can each use a different color, and you can then come to see how those colors map out onto these themes. You can also, and then as you move from bottom up to top, you come to condense and name that theme and define that theme. You can also, when you code for themes, you might want to start with your collaborative discussion about talking about the data and the data set and what you've seen at a higher level. What did you find striking that was there in the data? What did you find striking that wasn't there? What did you find that was different than what points did you find that diverged? What points did you find that converged? And so more of a narrative sort of discussion around the higher or the top aspect of that theme. And these may end up being themes that come out in the end, but they also give you an anchor point in order to start some of your groupings together. So for instance, and I'll show you on Jamboard in a minute, but for instance, with the group I have on the right-hand side, the top theme is stated as sensing exclusion from different activities in various places. So that is a higher level theme. It provides more a sense of meaning or experiential ideas than something that might be a little bit lower level. For instance, family unhappy about disability, or being called names, or other things that are easier when we conceptualize or think about these things. We can kind of visualize what that might look like. When we get higher up and more abstract, the idea of sensing exclusion from different activities in various places becomes a little bit more abstract, and we have to provide a little bit more of a discussion around what that means. But we use the quotations in the data to populate that understanding. And because it's looking really at meaning making in the data, then we tend to move further away from the data to the more abstract, than sticking with the more descriptive. And these come from different ideas or different ways of understanding or believing in reality in the world, of how you might come to choose what you do. So that I was trying to give you a little bit of an understanding of the different access or different ways I'm going to show you on Jamboard different possibilities by talking about that categorization aspect and then the theming aspect, from the categorization from bottom up and the theming from bottom up and top down. So I'm going to take you through, I should ask first if anybody has any questions before I change out of the PowerPoint to the online system. Are there any questions at all? You can put your hand up if there are. We're good. Okay. So when we look at the technology itself and what's possible for collaboration, Jamboard is one that provides us with a lot of that access. I've actually tried using like a Google Docs or that even other sort of types of Google apps, but they don't work as well as Jamboard in just being able to convey and easily move around the information that you want to collaborate on. So we're going to talk about Jamboard. I'm going to demonstrate to you how you access it and how you create a Jamboard, the different frames and the different tools. And then I'm going to take you through a process of a collaborative data analysis using Jamboard. I'm going to show you sort of a more descriptive categorical approach to it, and then more an abstract thematic approach to it. I'm going to stop sharing for a second while I just go online. Liva, can you see my Jamboard okay?
Yeah, I can see recent jams and your whole Chrome.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a Jamboard online. So this, you can see at the top, the URL is Jamboard, jamboard.google.com. And so you can just type in Jamboard. It's pretty easy. It usually comes up pretty high. It is a Google technology. So therefore, in any kind of Google search, Google Chrome search, it pretty much is at the top. So when you click on Jamboard, and you open up Jamboard, if you haven't used it before, the screen that I show you here will be blank. You won't have any recent jams. And so I have some recent jams, and I have a few more too, but I'm just showing you these ones so I don't overwhelm you. I have some recent jams, but I'll show you how to add a new one. So in the bottom, if you go to the bottom right-hand corner, there's a plus sign. And when you hover over it, it'll say new jam. So each one of these jam boards, they call jams, like a jam session. And so you click on that new one and it'll open up another jam. So this now, do you see the, I'm going to ask you again, do you see the untitled, it says untitled jam now?
Yes, I see the blank screen.
Okay, good. So I use this right thing. Okay, so this is the jam, a new jam that's been opened now. And so I want to do a few things to it. I want to rename it. So if you see over on the right-hand side, there's 3 little dots. And so I can click on rename and I can name it whatever I want. So webinar July 26th, and I can click on it. So if you notice in the top left-hand corner, it renames it. So that would be the first thing that I would do. And then you can also share it. So because we're going to look at collaborative data analysis, then you want to be able to share it with people. You click, there's a share button, blue share button in the top right-hand corner. You click on that and it loads overlay on the Jamboard where you can put in people's email addresses and then share with other people. So you can share that specific Jamboard. So you're not going to share all your Jamboards, just this one specific Jamboard. And then people will go to their email and be able to access from that. So that's how you would share it. So that's what your starting point. You'd create one and then share it with others so that everybody has access. As soon as you share it with others, it becomes part of their Jamboard screen. So you know how I showed you at the very beginning this, and this is a few more extra ones of mine, but if I showed you at the very beginning, the different Jamboards that I had, and it will become a recent Jamboard for whomever accepted your share. So now whenever they type in jamboard.google.com, it will come right up on their screen if they're logged into that, if they are logged into their Gmail account. So it'll come up and show their Jamboards. So you have, you can then access whichever Jamboard that you want to access. So I'm going to go into my webinar Jamboard. So I have this clear screen and there's different things that I can do with respects to the Jamboard. I can look at the different frames that I have here, and I can expand and create new frames, or I can look at what frames I have. So if I click on the center, I can see that I have 3 frames on this Jamboard. And so I'm going to go through those Jamboard frames with you. I can pick up any of these frames and I can move them so that I restructure the frames in a different way. I can also click on the plus signs in between and to add another frame in between each one of these Jamboards. When I'm done with that, I can click on the button again that goes back up. I can also add Jamboards by just clicking on, just keep clicking until you get to another one. So I have 3 right now. I'll go with 2, 3. As soon as I click, a 4th one is made. If I want to delete it, then I just go into that little top 3 dots again in the top right-hand corner of the screen, and I click on, right-click on the little 3 dots, and I go delete, and it gets rid of that one. And then I can click on, so on the very top, if I click on the little arrow underneath the 3 sheets, then it'll collapse it back up again. So that gives me the idea of how you can manipulate and move these different Jamboards around. You're allowed up to 20 Jamboards in one Jam. So that means you can do a bunch of different things with that. You can share, everybody could have work on one Jamboard, and then you can consolidate all your information together in another Jamboard. You can do different types of analysis. You can do it in different ways. I've had students who have used the Jam to with the stickies to create groupings, and then they use the other Jam screen frames in order to draw models that bring together those different groupings or themes. So that's the top. So we have the renaming and the different frames, and clicking on that frame picture in the very top to expand the frame, and then the share button on the far right-hand side, and the 3 dots that are on the right-hand side for more actions. So that's the top piece. It also has an undo button, and it has a zoom, so you can zoom in closer to different sections. After, underneath where it's named, there's 2 other aspects. There's set background, so you can click on that and you can change the background to look different, either by lines or by squares, or can give you other colored backgrounds. You can also add an image yourself. So when you click on set background in the top left-hand corner, it'll give you the last little rectangle is a little image of our mountains, and you can click on that and pull an image for that background from your own files. It will also support GIF, so moving animated pictures as well, so you can bring in animated pictures. So you can do different presentations and such with these as well, but we're looking at for just analysis. If you put an item on the and draw an item on the board, if you want to clear the frame, you just push the next one past set background and it'll clear the frame. So it'll clear everything that's on the frame. If you cleared it by mistake, you can go back to undo, and you can undo what you cleared on the frame. So that's how Jamboard looks, just the basics of setting it up. So if we look at the different items, so along the left-hand side, there's a sidebar, and there's a number of items, so 8 items that are included in this sidebar. And I think there's other Jamboard features that you can install as well. But we're just going to look at these original ones. So there's the top one's a pen. If you click on it, there's different size tips of pens, and there's 6 different colors that you can use in order to write with. The one underneath that's an eraser, and it will erase different lines, different situations. You have to actually move. So if I write on with a pen, you actually have to click on the eraser and then move the eraser along the line and erase it out. So if you want to erase everything on the screen, then you want to pick on clear frame instead, so that you can get rid of that because it's a lot faster. The third down is the select key. So if you want to select something on the screen and be able to move it or in a different place or move the text around, then you click on that third one down. The fourth one is a number of stickies, and I'm going to show you that process when we go through the analysis. And the 5th one is adding an image. And so you can upload from different places, camera, Google image search, Google Drive, Google Photos, or just upload from your desktop. And then the 6th one down is a shapes. So you can add different shapes to the board, to your frame, and so you can draw different shapes, and these are really useful if you want to draw shapes on the board to differentiate between different groupings of different things, and you can move them around and make them smaller really easily. You can also, if you go to the upper left-hand corner and click on that, you can rotate the item, and you can go up into the top left-hand corner, you can rotate the item. Go up in the top right-hand corner, you can delete the item. So I can delete this one as well. And then the seventh item is text. When you click on text, it'll give you a text box. And then at the top where it used to say set frame and clear frame, set background and clear frame, you'll see the type of or style of text, which is really about the size, the color of text, and then the alignment of the text. So if I want to, let's say, write in red, I can click on the red and I have my text box ready, and then I can write the text in red. That text will stay there, but I can move it around the board wherever I want to move it. And I can also, like I said, go to the top left-hand corner and rotate it so it can be positioned in different ways on the board. Then the last thing is a laser. And so it just works as a laser pointer, and it's quite useful if you're talking and collaborating with other people so that you can show them what you're talking about. It delays sort of, it's like a snake where the tail starts disappearing as you move. So you can show people where you're talking about and circle the object you're discussing, and it'll disappear. It doesn't stay like a line would. I'm going to show you now through this. I'm going to show you how you might come to organize some of these ideas. So I'm going to take you to the second screen. I've already set this up so that it has a title. So I used a pen and a text box. So I used a text box, not a pen. I used a text box to write the research question at the top. So I clicked on the color and I created a text box, and you can see I can click on the text box and I can move it around. So that's how you know it's a text box. So I can move it around on the screen. And so I created and wrote that text research at the top. I also wrote in text boxes the idea of barriers and facilitators, because my research question is, what are the barriers and facilitators to including persons with disabilities in research? So I can take from that question, that quite descriptive question, take the items that I'm trying to really look at within my data, and I can use them as the frame for my coding or grouping of codes collaboratively with my co-researchers. So there's I've created the text box. So I've gone to the text square. I've added a square to this so that I have a boundary around. If you, let's say I created the square now on top, I'm going to show you what happens. If you create a square on top after you put the text, then the square covers the text. This, we can go up to the fill color and make it transparent so that it's actually transparent. So you can see the text underneath it. You can also, if you go up to the right-hand corner, you can also go to order and you can send that text box back. So you can send it back or send it to the back, and you'll see now that the text box is actually behind the first text box I put on there. So you can reposition all of these things very easily. So I'm going to show you now how to use the sticky notes in order to categorize or group together different ideas. So I'm taking some data that's relevant to our question from some of the interviews that Pearl Group is looking at right now. So I open up the sticky notes, which is the fourth icon down on the left sidebar, and I'm going to write. So my first barrier is stigma, and so as soon as I do that, you can see that it populates onto the screen, and it usually moves up into the left-hand corner just as a default. So I can take that and pull it anywhere. And so I can take my idea of stigma and I can decide, is it a barrier or is it a facilitator? So I see stigma as a barrier. So I'm going to put it in barrier, and I can do that again. So I can put in another sticky note. So time. So is time a barrier or facilitator to persons with disability? Well, it depends on how you perceive time. So if it's enough time, so if a barrier is I don't have enough time, or if a barrier is, or a facilitator is we need time. So maybe I want to amend that. So I'm going to click on the top right hand corner where those 3 dots are. So I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to say, I'm going to change that sticky note to not. So, and I save it again, and now I feel comfortable putting in barriers. But I also want to put it in as a facilitator. So I'm going to go up into the top right hand corner. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to open it again, and I'm going to put so if we have enough time, then people can be included in research. We give ourselves enough time. So I'm going to put that under facilitators. So now we have a couple of different ideas under barriers of facilitators. So this is how you would go about doing it as an individual. When we do it collaboratively, we will go through different people's transcripts, and everybody will provide input into it. How I often like to do it is to have one person go through either a page or 2 of the same interview that somebody else might be doing as well. So if you're doing interviews in pairs, and have both of those people go through their first 2 pages, let's say, of an interview, and allow them to put information in. And as you go, as you add, so I'm going to add another, oops, I don't want that one. I'm going to add another sticky here, and I'm going to put in limited devices. So I'm going to click on that. So let's say I've just added limited devices, but what is limited devices? What does that mean? Is it a barrier? Is it a facilitator? What does that actually mean? So if people ask you, so you have this discussion with your other researchers. So what does that mean, limited devices? So I would go back in, open it up again, and I would put limited access to devices. So that provides a little bit more clarity. And now I can add it into my barriers group as well. So you keep going through these ideas. Now, if you want to be able to represent somebody else's idea and show it visually on the screen, I could use a different sticky note color. And there are up to 5 sticky note colors. So I could use, let's say, unwillingness to accommodate. Let's say that's one of the ones. So I saved that, unwillingness to accommodate, which I spelled wrong. It'll actually show when you can correct it. And so I have unwillingness to accommodate, which is a barrier. It's in green now, and that could represent another researcher so that you can get a visual of who's provided what impact. It could also be a different interview. So you might decide that you're going to use all of yellow for one interview, or all of yellow for interview 1 to 3. And you're going to use green for interview 4 to 6. So you can figure out how to use the colors to your best advantage. If you need to be able to designate where these different ideas came from, if you're not, so in the depict model, Steph Nixon spoke about a table or a chart where you can keep all this information related to the codes and where they're located in what interviews and what page. If you need to, you can add that information on these stickies as well. So participant 1, and you could do page 4, line 6. So you could add that information there. If there's more than one, if stigma comes up multiple times, you could just keep adding that page, the different participant number or different page line to that. So this provides your capacity to be able to organize the information in barriers and facilitators. If we look at, let's add more facilitator. So I'm going to add honorarium. So providing an honorarium, you can also stay here and just keep adding, typing in different codes. So you don't have to move away, and you can do it in sequence. So if you have a whole bunch to enter, you don't need to keep replacing. You don't have to keep replacing the sticky into its spot until you've actually gone through and typed out different ones that you want to, different codes you want to address. So I could then put them into my facilitator group. We could discuss what those are. Now within the barriers and facilitators group, I can come to join the information into sub themes. So if I have, let's say, 50 or 100 stickies within the barriers, that's getting to be a little bit much. So I can start trying to group those things together. And so trying to figure out, do any of these things align? Are any of these things similar? So let's say if I added in poor internet, then it might be that the poor internet is somewhat associated with limited access to devices. So they're different, but they're technological versus something like stigma and unwillingness to accommodate might be more about perspective or perceptions of individuals' capacity. So these types of ideas might be able to be grouped under barriers, just like ideas under facilitation could. So maybe having enough time might be grouped with honorarium, perhaps. And this is what you will decide as you go through these points with your colleagues in an analysis. So this is a way of looking at things that are concrete, having these two sort of sections. And then you can add on top of that the subcategories, and you can make a decision about how you might actually frame these things. So we might have we could look at how we come to organize the different types of barriers and then start naming them. So maybe these are all technological barriers, and maybe some are more perceptions of disability or something like that. So maybe these are perceptions of disability. So that's to the barrier about how people then perceive disability. So they're unwilling to accommodate stigma. Perhaps those things come together, and now you have these sub categories within the idea around barriers, and these start coming out more and more as you add more text into there. So that's the jam. I'm realizing that we're getting close. I'm going to show you just briefly when we look at experiences of persons with disabilities. So something broader, something more thematic. We can start from different ends. We can start from that discussion around more global sort of understandings of what's happening within the interviews to bring that forward so that we have an anchor. So I might have something like, which I had on the screen in the original slides. So sensing exclusion from different activities in various places. So that could be one theme, feeling courageous and powerful. That could be one theme, and then sharing responsibilities or collaboration. Maybe that's another thing. So maybe through our discussions across all the interviews, we had these long discussions, and we've decided, we've come to realize that there's these threads or patterns across the interviews that are fairly high up, that are thematic, that really capture experience or meaning that is conveyed through these interviews. And so one way to start looking at meaning-making aspects is to start actually at the top. So these broader thematic categories, and then go and look at your codes that you coded the data and associate those codes with these thematic categories, allowing yourself to not necessarily be stuck to these thematic categories, but it gives you a center for you to be able to start thinking about the categories. So that's one way of that top down. So then we would look at things like adding, being placed at. So what is being placed at the receiving end mean? So being placed at the receiving end means you're always just receiving the information, or you're always just being told what to do. So if it's always just being told what to do, then that probably either could fit with sensing exclusion from different activities. So you feel excluded from activities, but it might also really fit well with the idea of sharing responsibilities for collaboration and belonging. So really wanting to be engaged in and belong to the whole continuum with respects to collaboration. So the arguing about that feeling of being placed at the receiving end and really talking about it within that idea around how we need to really look at shared responsibilities for collaboration and belonging. So that's how we could come to impose the categories around those themes. Now, if we actually ended up with wanting to start the other way, and wanting to start with our themes, then we could start putting in the themes just like with the barriers and facilitators, and we could add the different themes in. So being placed at the receiving end, always having to argue for inclusion, one. So you can see even when we look at these codes that we're putting in here, they're much more thematic. They're a little bit more about meaning making than they are about things. And so they give us a little bit more context. So being included only as needed. Well, that sounds quite similar to being placed at the receiving end. So that sounds quite similar. Taking ownership. So taking ownership, it might be similar in the end to that. We have to think about that, and always having to argue for inclusion. So this might go a little bit with being placed at the receiving end, being included only as needed. Because you're only being included as needed, you always have to argue for inclusion. So these ideas might eventually come together, and you'll start grouping those together from a more of a bottom up sense with respects to developing those themes. So I realize it's 1:27, and I want to be able to answer any questions if there are any. So I'm just going to stop sharing. And I just have a couple of minutes if I can hang on longer, but if anybody has any questions at all. I know that was fairly quick, but we really wanted to give you sort of an awareness of the possibilities of Jamboard and different perspectives.
Thank you, Jane. That was really informative. I learned a lot about Jamboard and qualitative analysis. Just a quick thing I wanted to add for everyone before you guys log off. I will be putting the survey in the chat. So if you can please fill that out, it will take a few moments. And yeah, so we can just kind of learn of your experience and how we can make these webinars more accessible for you. That would be great. And thank you everyone for joining in. And thank you, Jane, so much for such a great presentation. Yeah.
You're welcome, Leiba. Any questions at all? Jamboard is really something that you can, it's easy to just sort of log on and create and delete. And it's one of those things that's not scary to try out.
I see that its functioning can be beyond like qualitative analysis too. Like you can use it for teaching if anyone's in teaching as well. Or like even to learn different concepts if you're a student. So I'm definitely going to learn how to use it for my own like classes as a student. So
yeah, there's a lot of collaborative sort of options to that. Stefan, you asked about the types of downloads. So if you go into the three dots, I think am I sharing the right screen again? Go into the three dots for more actions at the top. You can download as a PDF. You can save a frame as an image. So you're able to do that. And you can also go back to, it has a version history, so you can go back to different version histories if you have deleted something by mistake and you want to go back, but you can do a PDF or an image right now. I think it'll probably evolve a little bit as more people use. It's fairly new to the system, and it's changed a fair bit just since I've started using it like 6 months ago.
Yeah, I know someone in the tech industry who works at Facebook actually, and they've heard of Jamboard before, so they're using it in tech as well, just to like have ideas, all posted.
Yeah, we tried, like I said, Google Docs and other things where we made text boxes or lines and try to do the same sort of thing, because I've always done affinity analysis with my research students, and so we've typically used like whiteboards or we, like Steph Nixon talked about, you might cut out passages from different hard copy interviews and sort of place them on a table, and you can do that same affinity analysis that way, put them in envelopes, so you can do that with the hard copy, but we hadn't had opportunities to do it online, and all my research with students has moved online as of March 2020. So having to find different ways to actually be able to do this was tricky at the beginning. The Jamboards really sort of helped a lot. Well, thank you, everybody. If nobody has any more questions, then.
Hello, I do have a question.
Yep.
I want to find out how you exported your jams from the Jamboard to your slide. Did you just take a screenshot of it, or you have a way to export it from the Jamboard itself to?
Yeah, you can export it in two ways. So if you go to the Jamboard site, I shared before and showed, but there's in the very top hand right corner, I'm just going to describe it. Top hand right corner, there's 3 dots. And if you click on those 3 dots or hover above those, I guess you have to click on the 3 dots. It allows you to download as a PDF, or it allows you to save the frame as an image. So you can do those 2 different things.
Okay, great.
It's not a lot of flexibility right at that time, but it's getting there, it's getting a bit more flexibility to it. I would love to be able to actually extract it as like a PowerPoint or something like that, but we're not quite there yet. There's some sort of presentation set up.
Do you know if there's an app for it, like for Samsung or iPhones?
I think there might be, because I have seen presentations. So YouTube has a number, of course, of presentations of Jamboard, and there's extra features, extra tools that I've seen presented. And so I think that those are specifically sort of through the different apps. You can add links and things like that, and they tend to be more teaching based tools, I find, than that might be useful for collaborative research, but there I think there's other options too, but just wanted to present sort of the basic of what everybody could access online here. Okay, thanks everybody for coming today. And if you have any questions or anything, you're always welcome to email me. I actually didn't put my email on here, but my email is ja.davis@utoronto.ca. So you're welcome to email me. You can find me online as well. I used to teach with Lynn.
And just a final comment, we recorded this session and we'll be putting it on our YouTube channel in the next week. So if you'd like to come back and look at the different concepts that Jane discussed, you are able to do that way. All right, thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Bye.